My brother stole my military medal. Then the president called to award me another. The shadow box sat empty on Marcus Chen's nightstand, its velvet interior bearing only the faint outline of what had been there just hours before. The Bronze Star Medal with Valor device was gone, along with the accompanying ribbon and citation that had once filled the frame with quiet dignity. Marcus stared at the vacant space, his fingers tracing the edges of the glass as if the medal might somehow reappear through sheer will. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He'd earned that medal in the mountains of Afghanistan, carrying wounded soldiers through enemy fire during an ambush that lasted 14 hours. The weight of it in his hands during the ceremony had felt like validation, like proof that the nightmares and the sleepless nights meant something. Now, all that remained was an empty case and the growing certainty that his younger brother Ryan had taken it while he was at his overnight security job. Marcus had returned from his deployment 8 months ago to a hero's welcome that felt more like a spotlight than an embrace. The local newspaper ran a feature story complete with a photo of him in dress uniform holding the Bronze Star. His parents had framed the article and hung it in their living room, right next to Ryan's high school graduation photo and soccer trophies. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone in the family. While Marcus had been overseas, Ryan had dropped out of community college, moved back into their childhood bedroom, and settled into a comfortable routine of sleeping until noon and playing video games until dawn. Their parents, Helen and David Chen, treated Ryan's directionless existence with the same patient understanding they'd once reserved for his childhood tantrums. He was finding himself, they said. He needed space to figure out his path. Marcus had moved into the basement apartment his father had finished years ago, paying $800 a month in rent despite the fact that Ryan contributed nothing to the household expenses. When Marcus questioned the arrangement, his mother had pulled him aside with that familiar look of gentle disappointment. Ryan was struggling with anxiety, she explained. The pressure of expectations was overwhelming him. Marcus, being the responsible older brother, surely understood the importance of setting a good example. The morning Marcus discovered the missing medal, he'd climbed the stairs from his basement apartment to find Ryan sprawled across the living room couch, controller in hand, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and pizza boxes. The television displayed some first-person shooter game where digital soldiers earned digital medals for digital valor. Marcus stood in the doorway for several minutes, watching his brother navigate virtual battlefields with the same focus Marcus had once applied to real ones. "Have you seen my medal?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice level. Ryan didn't look away from the screen. "Which medal?" "The Bronze Star. It's missing from the case." Ryan's character died in a spectacular explosion. He tossed the controller onto the coffee table and finally turned to face his brother. "Maybe you misplaced it. You've been pretty scattered lately." Scattered. The word hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had been working 60-hour weeks at the security company, sending resumes to federal agencies, and attending veterans group meetings twice a week. If that qualified as scattered, then structure was a foreign concept in this house. "I don't misplace things, especially not that." Ryan shrugged and reached for his controller again. "Mom probably moved it while cleaning. You know how she is about dusting everything." But Marcus knew his mother's cleaning habits. She dusted around important items, never moved them. The medal had been in its case when he left for work the previous evening. Now it was gone. And Ryan was the only person who'd been home overnight. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the pawn shop on 5th Street, then to the one on Maple Avenue, then to 3 more scattered across the city. He showed the clerks a photo of the medal from his phone, described its distinctive ribbon, and the small V device that denoted valor. None of them had seen it, but they all promised to call if anyone brought in military decorations. Their expressions carried a mixture of sympathy and recognition. They'd dealt with stolen valor cases before. Marcus spent the evening researching online marketplaces, scrolling through listings for military medals and decorations. The Bronze Star wasn't particularly rare, but the specific citation and accompanying paperwork would make his unique. He bookmarked several auction sites and set up alerts for relevant keywords. If Ryan had sold it online, Marcus would find it. The next morning brought a text message from his mother. "Family dinner, Sunday at 6. Ryan has some exciting news to share." Marcus arrived at his parents' house to find Ryan dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt, a dramatic departure from his usual uniform of sweatpants and gaming t-shirts. He sat at the dining room table with his back straight, hands folded, wearing an expression Marcus hadn't seen since Ryan's high school graduation. Their parents flanked him like proud generals presenting a decorated officer. "Ryan got a job," Helen announced before Marcus had fully settled into his chair. "At GameStop, assistant manager position." David nodded approvingly. "Full-time hours, benefits, real responsibility." The manager was impressed with Ryan's knowledge of the products. Ryan basked in their attention like a plant turning toward sunlight. "I start Monday. The interview went really well. I think I found my calling." Marcus forced a smile and offered congratulations that tasted like cardboard in his mouth. Ryan had landed an entry-level retail position and was receiving the kind of celebration Marcus might have expected for a promotion to partner at a law firm. Meanwhile, his Bronze Star remained missing, and Ryan showed no signs of concern about its disappearance. During dessert, Marcus noticed Ryan wearing a new watch. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't the kind of purchase someone made while unemployed and living rent-free in their parents' house. When Marcus complimented it, Ryan glanced down at his wrist as if he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "Early birthday present to myself," Ryan said. "Figured I deserved something nice after landing the job." Marcus nodded and took another bite of his mother's apple pie. He was learning to document inconsistencies, to notice the small details that didn't align. An unemployed young man buying himself a watch, a missing medal, and a brother who avoided eye contact when discussing it. Parents who celebrated mediocrity while taking excellence for granted. That week, Marcus opened a small notebook and began keeping records, not just about the medal, but about everything. Ryan's new purchases, his parents' different standards for their two sons, the monthly rent Marcus paid versus Ryan's zero contribution to household expenses. Each entry was dated and detailed, written in the same careful handwriting Marcus had used for military reports. On Thursday, Marcus received a call from a pawn shop owner in the neighboring county. A young man matching Ryan's description had attempted to sell a Bronze Star medal 2 days earlier. The owner had turned him away, explaining that military decorations required proper documentation of legal ownership. The young man had seemed nervous and left quickly when pressed for details. Marcus drove to the pawn shop during his lunch break and confirmed the description. The owner, a Vietnam veteran named Frank Kowalski, showed Marcus the security camera footage. There was Ryan, clearly identifiable, holding Marcus's medal in his hands and arguing with the clerk about documentation requirements. "I told him he needed discharge papers and a certificate of transfer," Frank explained. "Military decorations aren't like jewelry or electronics."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Rules about selling them, especially Valor Awards. Kid didn't seem to understand that. Marcus asked for a copy of the footage, and Frank burned it to a DVD without charge. "Brothers in arms look out for each other," Frank said, shaking Marcus's hand. "Your brother doesn't know what he's messing with." That evening, Marcus sat in his basement apartment and added the pawn shop incident to his notebook. He'd been documenting for less than a week, but already a pattern was emerging. Ryan took things without asking, made purchases he couldn't afford, and received unconditional support from their parents regardless of his behavior. Marcus, meanwhile, paid rent, worked overtime, and watched his personal property disappear without consequence. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning when Marcus found Ryan's laptop unattended on the kitchen counter. His brother was in the shower and their parents had gone grocery shopping. Marcus opened the browser and navigated to the History tab. What he found there made his hands shake with something beyond anger. Ryan had been researching the value of Bronze Star medals, reading forums about military collectibles, and browsing auction sites for similar decorations. Most disturbing were the searches for how to sell military metal without paperwork and fake military discharge documents. Ryan wasn't just a thief, he was planning to forge the documentation needed to complete the sale. Marcus took screenshots of every relevant page and saved them to a flash drive he kept on his keychain. He cleared the browser history of his own activity and left the laptop exactly where he'd found it. When Ryan emerged from the shower 20 minutes later, Marcus was reading a magazine in the living room, showing no sign of his discovery. Sunday's family dinner carried a different energy. Ryan announced he'd received his first paycheck and wanted to take everyone out to celebrate. He suggested a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place that required reservations and charged $30 for an entree. Helen and David accepted immediately, already planning what they'd order. Marcus watched his brother's performance with new understanding. Ryan's generosity was funded by stolen valor, literally and figuratively. He was using Marcus's sacrifice to buy his parents' approval and admiration. The medal represented 14 hours of combat, 3 wounded soldiers carried to safety, and a citation for conspicuous gallantry under fire. Ryan saw it as a pawn to enhance his own reputation. During the dinner, Marcus excused himself to use the restroom and instead stepped outside to make a phone call. He'd been researching federal agencies that investigated stolen valor cases and had found a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Special Agent Sarah Morrison listened to his summary and asked him to email the documentation he'd collected. Military decoration theft is a federal crime, Morrison explained, especially when there's intent to sell or profit from the stolen property. The evidence you've described suggests a clear pattern of fraudulent activity. Marcus returned to the dinner table to find Ryan regaling his parents with stories from his first week at GameStop. He spoke about product knowledge and customer service with the enthusiasm of someone describing a diplomatic mission. Helen and David hung on every word, asking follow-up questions about store policies and promotional strategies. Marcus was just like this when he got back from deployment, Helen said, reaching across the table to squeeze Ryan's hand. So passionate about his work, so dedicated to doing his best. The comparison stung because it was simultaneously true and completely wrong. Marcus had been passionate about his military service, but that passion was born from a sense of duty and sacrifice that Ryan had never experienced. Now Ryan was receiving the same praise for selling video games that Marcus had earned by carrying wounded soldiers through enemy fire. After dinner, Ryan insisted on paying the check with cash. He pulled a thick roll of bills from his wallet and peeled off enough 20s to cover the meal and a generous tip. When the server thanked him, Ryan waved dismissively and said it was nothing. He could afford to be generous now that he was building his career. Marcus watched the transaction with growing certainty. Ryan's first paycheck from GameStop wouldn't have been large enough to fund this level of spending. The cash roll, the expensive dinner, the new watch, all of it pointed to additional income from an undisclosed source. Most likely, Ryan had found a buyer for the Bronze Star medal who was less concerned about proper documentation than Frank Kowalski had been. That night, Marcus drafted an email to Special Agent Morrison with all the evidence he'd collected. Screenshots of Ryan's browser history, security footage from the pawn shop, detailed records of Ryan's unexplained spending, and photographs of the empty metal case. He attached a copy of his own military records and the original citation for the Bronze Star to establish his legal ownership of the stolen property. Before sending the email, Marcus added a final paragraph explaining his motivation. This wasn't about revenge or sibling rivalry. It was about protecting the integrity of military decorations and ensuring that valor couldn't be bought and sold like a commodity. The Bronze Star represented the highest ideals of military service. It deserved better than to become a pawn in Ryan's scheme to avoid adult responsibility. Marcus hit send at 11:47 p.m. and then closed his laptop. In the morning, federal agents would begin investigating his brother for theft and fraud. The family dynamics that had protected Ryan for years would soon face scrutiny from people who understood the true value of military sacrifice. Marcus had learned to document everything, to build a case with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to military operations. He opened his notebook and made one final entry for the evening. Evidence submitted to federal authorities. Case now in professional hands. Ryan's protection from consequences officially over. The silence in his basement apartment felt different than it had in months. Not empty, but expectant. Like the moment before a crucial mission when all the planning finally gives way to action. Marcus had spent weeks learning to be patient, to observe, to gather evidence instead of confronting problems directly. Now he would discover whether that patience had been wisdom or weakness. 3 days later, Special Agent Morrison called with an update. The FBI had opened a formal investigation into the theft and attempted sale of Marcus's Bronze Star medal. They'd already contacted the pawn shop owner for an official statement and were working with local law enforcement to identify potential buyers in the area. Morrison asked Marcus to avoid discussing the investigation with family members until agents had a chance to interview Ryan directly. Marcus agreed to the request and continued his normal routine. He worked his security shifts, attended veterans meetings, and appeared for family dinners as if nothing had changed. Ryan, meanwhile, seemed to be gaining confidence with each passing day. He'd moved from part-time to full-time hours at GameStop and was already talking about advancement opportunities within the company. "The district manager noticed my performance metrics," Ryan announced during Sunday dinner. "She's considering me for a promotion to senior assistant manager. It comes with a raise and additional responsibilities." Helen clapped her hands together. "Oh, Ryan, that's wonderful news. You've worked so hard for this." David nodded approvingly. "Success recognizes success. Your dedication is paying off." Marcus chewed his pot roast and said nothing. Ryan's version of hard work involves standing behind a counter selling video games to teenagers. It was honest employment, and Marcus didn't begrudge anyone earning a legitimate paycheck. But the praise Ryan received for basic job performance felt disproportionate compared to the minimal acknowledgement Marcus had received for military service. After dinner, Ryan pulled Marcus aside in the kitchen. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his expression unusually serious. "For what?" "For being patient with me. I know I've been kind of directionless since you got back, and I know Mom and Dad have been focusing on my problems instead of celebrating your achievements. That probably wasn't easy." Marcus studied his brother's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, he saw what appeared to be genuine remorse and gratitude. For a moment, he considered confessing that he'd already set federal investigators on Ryan's trail. Then he remembered the empty metal case and the security footage of Ryan attempting to sell stolen valor. "Everyone finds their path at their own pace," Marcus said finally. Ryan smiled and nodded. "Exactly. And I think I'm finally finding mine. Things are going to be different now." 2 weeks later, Special Agent Morrison called again. The FBI had identified the buyer who'd purchased Marcus's Bronze Star medal. A private collector named William Hartley had bought it through an online marketplace for $800. Hartley claimed he'd purchased it in good faith, believing the seller's story about inheriting it from a deceased uncle. When agents explained the theft, Hartley immediately turned over the medal and provided records of his communication with Ryan. "We have enough evidence to file charges," Morrison explained. "Theft of military property, mail fraud for using the Postal Service to ship stolen goods, and potential identity theft if he used false information in the sale. Your brother is looking at significant federal penalties." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that his medal would be returned, apprehension about the impact on his family when they learned about Ryan's crimes. His parents still believed their younger son was finally turning his life around. The truth would shatter their faith in his redemption story. "When will you make the arrest?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow morning. We'll execute a search warrant at your parents' house and take Ryan into custody. You should probably arrange to be somewhere else during the operation." Marcus scheduled a dental appointment for the following morning and left his basement apartment before dawn. He spent 2 hours in a waiting room reading outdated magazines and trying not to imagine the scene unfolding at his childhood home. Federal agents searching Ryan's bedroom, his parents demanding explanations they wouldn't like receiving, the neighbors watching from their windows as their quiet suburb became the scene of a criminal investigation. When Marcus finally returned home that afternoon, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with a box of tissues and a cup of untouched tea. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair disheveled from running her hands through it. She looked up when Marcus entered, but didn't speak. "Where's Dad?" Marcus asked. "With Ryan, at the lawyer's office." Helen's voice was barely above a whisper. "They arrested him this morning. Federal agents, Marcus. They said he stole your metal and sold it to some collector in Pennsylvania." Marcus sat down across from his mother and waited for her to continue. "The agents showed us evidence. Computer searches, bank records, messages with this collector person. Ryan had been planning it for weeks." Helen wiped her eyes with a tissue. "They asked if we knew about any unexplained income or new purchases. All those dinners he paid for, that watch, the generous tips at restaurants. It was all from selling your bronze star." Marcus nodded, but didn't offer commentary. He'd known this moment would come since the day he'd sent his evidence to the FBI. The shock on his mother's face was genuine, but it was also overdue. Ryan's behavior had been escalating for months, and their parents had chosen to ignore the warning signs in favor of celebrating his minimal achievements. "Why didn't you tell us it was missing?" Helen asked. "I did tell you. You said I probably
Misplaced it. Helen flinched as if he'd slapped her. "We didn't know he'd actually taken it. We thought maybe you'd moved it somewhere safe and forgotten." Would it have mattered? When has Ryan ever faced consequences for anything he's done? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Helen opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She couldn't defend Ryan's actions, but she also couldn't accept that her protective instincts had enabled his criminal behavior. David and Ryan returned home that evening looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Ryan's face was pale and drawn, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something approaching humility. David moved with the careful steps of someone trying not to collapse under unexpected weight. "The lawyer says we're looking at federal charges," David announced to the kitchen in general. "Theft, mail fraud, possibly more depending on what else they find. Ryan could be facing years in prison." Ryan slumped into a chair at the kitchen table. "I didn't think it was that big a deal. It's just a medal. Marcus has others." The casual dismissal of his bronze star as just a medal sent heat through Marcus's chest. He'd earned that decoration by risking his life to save wounded soldiers. The citation described 14 hours of continuous combat, 3 separate rescue operations under enemy fire, and leadership that inspired an entire platoon to hold their position against overwhelming odds. To Ryan, it was just another piece of metal to be converted into spending money. "It's not just a medal," Marcus said, his voice steady but sharp. "It represents something you'll never understand because you've never sacrificed anything for anyone else." Ryan's face flushed red. "I'm sacrificing now? I could go to prison because of this." "You could go to prison because you stole from your brother and committed federal crimes. The sacrifice part is long overdue." Helen started crying again. "Please don't fight. This family has been through enough today." But Marcus was just getting started. Months of accumulated resentment and disappointment were finally finding their voice. "This family has been through enough? I spent 18 months in Afghanistan getting shot at by people who wanted to kill me. I came home to find my brother living like a teenager, contributing nothing, being celebrated for bare minimum effort. And when I earned recognition for actual valor, he stole it and sold it like scrap metal." David held up his hands. "Marcus, we know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but Ryan is still your brother. He made a terrible mistake, but he's family. Family doesn't steal your bronze star and sell it to collectors. Family doesn't let you pay rent while they live for free. Family doesn't treat your military service like an inconvenience while celebrating retail employment like a career achievement." The words came out harder than Marcus had intended, but they carried the weight of months of silence. He'd been the good son, the responsible brother, the uncomplaining veteran who didn't make waves or demand attention. That patience had been mistaken for acceptance, and his sacrifice had been taken for granted. Ryan finally looked directly at Marcus. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I really am sorry. I was jealous of all the attention you got when you came home, and I wanted people to think I was successful too. So you stole my success instead of earning your own? I didn't think of it that way. How did you think of it? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. I thought of it as borrowing from someone who had enough to spare. The answer was so perfectly selfish that Marcus almost laughed. In Ryan's mind, Marcus's military decorations were family property to be shared as needed. The fact that Marcus had earned them through combat didn't create any special ownership rights. They were just resources to be redistributed based on who needed them most at any given moment. I don't have enough to spare. I have exactly what I earned, nothing more. Over the next several weeks, the criminal case against Ryan moved through
Federal system with methodical efficiency. His lawyer negotiated a plea agreement that included full restitution, community service, and 2 years of probation. Ryan would avoid prison time, but he'd carry a federal conviction for the rest of his life. The plea hearing took place on a Thursday morning in downtown federal court. Marcus sat in the gallery with his parents, watching Ryan stand before a judge and formally admit to stealing and selling the Bronze Star Medal. The judge asked Ryan if he understood the significance of military decorations, and Ryan mumbled something about honoring service members and respecting their sacrifices. After the hearing, the family gathered in the courthouse lobby to discuss what came next. Ryan would need to find new employment since GameStop had terminated him following his arrest. He'd also need to move out of his parents' house as part of his probation requirements. For the first time in his adult life, Ryan would be facing genuine independence and accountability. "Where will you live?" Helen asked, her voice still carrying traces of the protective concern that had enabled Ryan's behavior for years. "I'll figure something out," Ryan replied. "Maybe I can find a roommate situation or a cheap studio apartment." Marcus listened to the conversation with growing recognition. His parents were already shifting into problem-solving mode, ready to help Ryan navigate the consequences of his criminal behavior. They'd probably offer to co-sign a lease, provide furniture from their house, maybe even help with security deposits and utility connections. Ryan's punishment would become another family project managed by parents who couldn't distinguish between support and enablement. That afternoon, Marcus received a call from Special Agent Morrison. "I wanted to let you know that your Bronze Star is ready for pickup. We've completed our investigation and no longer need it as evidence." Marcus drove to the FBI field office and signed the paperwork to reclaim his medal. Morrison handed him the shadow box, which had been carefully reassembled with the medal, ribbon, and citation in their proper positions. "Your brother's case was pretty straightforward," Morrison said, "but I wanted to mention something else that came up during our investigation. When we interviewed the collector who bought your medal, he told us about a conversation he'd had with someone at the Department of Defense." Marcus looked up from the shadow box. "What kind of conversation?" "Apparently, the collector felt guilty about unknowingly buying stolen valor, so he called the Pentagon to report the transaction. He spoke with someone in the Awards and Decorations office who took down all the details about your case. I thought you should know that your situation has gotten some attention at pretty high levels." Morrison handed Marcus a business card with a phone number written on the back. "Colonel Patricia Hayes from the Pentagon called yesterday asking for your contact information. She said she'd like to speak with you about your case." Marcus drove home with the shadow box secured in his passenger seat and Colonel Hayes' phone number in his shirt pocket. The medal looked exactly as it had before Ryan stole it, but something had changed about its meaning. It was no longer just a decoration for past valor. It had become evidence of present character, proof that some things were worth fighting for, even when the enemy was your own family. That evening, Marcus returned the Bronze Star to its place on his nightstand. The shadow box caught the light from his bedside lamp, casting familiar shadows across the velvet interior. He'd missed seeing it there, missed the quiet reminder that his service had mattered to someone besides himself. Before going to sleep, Marcus opened his notebook and wrote his final entry about the stolen medal case. Property recovered, justice served, family relationships permanently altered, personal integrity maintained. He closed the notebook and placed it in his desk drawer next to other documents from his military service. Military service. The silence in his basement apartment was different now. Not the silence of someone waiting for justice, but the silence of someone who had learned to create it himself. Marcus had documented everything, built an unshakable case, and used the system to hold his brother accountable when his family wouldn't. It hadn't been revenge, it had been responsibility. 2 days later, Marcus called Colonel Hayes at the Pentagon. She answered on the second ring and spoke with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to getting things done quickly. "Sergeant Chen, thank you for calling. I've been following your case through our liaison with the FBI. I understand your Bronze Star was stolen by a family member and sold to a private collector?" "Yes, ma'am. My younger brother took it from my apartment and sold it online. The FBI recovered it as part of their criminal investigation." "I'm sorry that happened to you. Military decorations represent sacred trusts between service members and their country. When that trust is violated, it diminishes all of us." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond, so he waited for Colonel Hayes to continue. "The reason I'm calling is that your case has generated some discussion here about the challenges facing returning veterans. Stories like yours highlight the gap between military and civilian understanding of what these decorations represent. We'd like to do something to address that gap." Colonel Hayes explained that the Department of Defense was planning a ceremony to honor veterans whose decorations had been stolen or lost through circumstances beyond their control. The event would take place at the Pentagon and include presentations by senior military leadership about the significance of military awards. "We'd like to invite you to participate in this ceremony. You'd receive a replacement Bronze Star directly from the Secretary of Defense, and your story would help educate people about the true meaning of these decorations." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "When would this ceremony take place?" 3 weeks from today. We'll cover your travel expenses and arrange overnight accommodations if needed. This isn't just about replacing a medal, it's about reaffirming the value of your service to your country." After ending the call with Colonel Hayes, Marcus sat in his basement apartment and tried to process what had just happened. His decision to pursue federal charges against Ryan had somehow resulted in an invitation to the Pentagon and a ceremony with the Secretary of Defense. What had begun as a simple case of theft had escalated into a national conversation about stolen valor and veteran recognition. Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Ryan's number. He hadn't spoken to his brother since the plea hearing 2 weeks ago, and he wasn't sure what he wanted to say now. But the Pentagon ceremony felt like something Ryan should know about, if only to understand the full scope of what he'd set in motion. Ryan answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Marcus. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. I wanted to let you know about something that's happening because of your case. The Pentagon is holding a ceremony for veterans whose decorations were stolen. I'm going to receive a replacement Bronze Star from the Secretary of Defense." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice was quiet and strained. "That's incredible, Marcus. I'm happy for you, I really am. It wouldn't be happening if you hadn't stolen my medal. I know. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how my stupidity turned into something bigger than either of us expected." Marcus waited for Ryan to continue. "I start my new job on Monday, warehouse work, night shift, not exactly glamorous, but it's honest work and I won't have access to other people's property. My probation officer says that's probably for the best." "Probably. Marcus, I know this doesn't change anything. I want you to know that I understand now. What I took from you wasn't just a medal. It was proof of who you are, evidence of something I've never been. I tried to steal your identity because I didn't have one of my own worth keeping." The admission caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected defensiveness or self-pity, not this kind of clear-eyed self-assessment. "What are you going to do about that?" Marcus asked. "Build something worth keeping. It'll take time, and it won't be dramatic like military service, but maybe I can become someone who adds value instead of just taking it." Marcus ended the call feeling something unexpected, hope for his brother's redemption. Not the false hope their parents had nurtured with unconditional support, but the harder hope that comes from watching someone accept responsibility for their failures and commit to genuine change. The ceremony at the Pentagon took place on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. Marcus wore his dress blue uniform and stood with 11 other veterans whose decorations had been stolen or lost. Each of them had a story about sacrifice unrecognized or valor betrayed, but they'd all found ways to reclaim their dignity through legal channels and proper authorities. Secretary of Defense Jennifer Walsh presented each veteran with a replacement decorations and a ceremony attended by senior military leadership and congressional representatives. When she placed Marcus's new Bronze Star in his hands, she spoke about the medal's significance and the importance of protecting military honors from exploitation. "This decoration represents more than individual achievement," Secretary Walsh said. "It represents the values that define our military: courage, sacrifice, integrity, and commitment to something greater than ourselves. When these decorations are stolen or misused, it's an attack on those values, and on every service member who has upheld them." After the ceremony, Marcus joined the other veterans for a reception in the Pentagon's executive dining room. He found himself in conversations with people who understood the weight of military service, who recognized the difference between earning recognition and seeking it. These were his peers in ways his own family had never been. During the reception, Marcus received a business card from a representative of the Veterans Administration who specialized in helping former service members transition to federal employment. She'd been impressed by his handling of the stolen medal case and thought his investigative skills might translate well to federal law enforcement or security positions. Marcus flew home that afternoon carrying his replacement Bronze Star and a folder full of information about federal career opportunities. The ceremony had been more than a symbolic gesture. It had become a doorway to possibilities he hadn't previously considered. His methodical approach to documenting and pursuing justice had attracted attention from people who valued those qualities in their employees. When Marcus returned to his basement apartment that evening, he placed the new Bronze Star in its shadow box next to the recovered original. Two identical medals, but with completely different stories. One represented valor in combat. The other represented integrity in crisis. Both belonged to him. Both reflected who he'd chosen to become when faced with challenges that revealed character. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a job offer from the Department of Homeland Security to work as a federal investigator specializing in fraud cases. The position offered better pay than his security job, federal benefits, and opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than politics. Most importantly, it was work that aligned with his values and utilized skills he developed through military service and civilian challenges. Marcus accepted the job offer and submitted his resignation to the security company. His last day at the private sector position coincided with Ryan's first paycheck from the warehouse job. The timing felt significant, like the universe was balancing accounts and settling debts, according to some cosmic ledger of justice and consequence. At his final family dinner before starting his federal career, Marcus found himself sitting across from a version of Ryan he'd never seen before. His brother looked tired but determined, wearing work clothes that actually showed signs of physical labor. Ryan spoke about his job with quiet competence rather than desperate enthusiasm, describing challenges and learning opportunities without seeking praise for basic effort. "How's the night shift treating you?" Marcus asked. "It's hard work, but good work. I'm learning logistics, inventory management, equipment operation. My supervisor says I might be ready for additional training in a few months if I keep improving." Helen and David listened to Ryan's update with supportive interest, but without the excessive celebration that had once accompanied his minimal achievements. The federal charges had recalibrated their expectations and forced them to distinguish between progress and performance. "And how's your new job going to be, Marcus?" Helen asked. "Challenging. I'll be investigating financial crimes, fraud cases, things that require attention to detail and methodical evidence gathering. It feels like a good fit for my skills." David raised his water glass. "To new beginnings for both our sons. Different paths, but both moving forward." They toasted with water and iced tea, a modest celebration that felt more genuine than the elaborate dinners Ryan had once funded with stolen valor. Marcus looked around the table and saw a family that was finally learning to distinguish between support and enablement, between love and indulgence. After dinner, Ryan walked Marcus to his car. "I wanted to thank you again for pursuing that case. I know it couldn't have been easy to turn in your own brother. It wasn't about turning you in. It was about protecting something that mattered. I understand that now, And I wanted you to know that I'm proud of how you handled everything. The Pentagon ceremony, the new job, the way you've rebuilt your life after service. You're someone worth looking up to." Marcus felt the sincerity in Ryan's words and recognized it as the first genuine compliment his brother had ever given him. Not praise her being patient with family dysfunction, but acknowledgement of actual character and achievement. "Keep working on becoming someone you can look up to," Marcus replied. "That's more important than anyone else's opinion." 6 months later, Marcus received his first commendation from the Department of Homeland Security for his work on a complex fraud investigation. The case had required him to trace financial transactions across multiple states, build relationships with local law enforcement, and testify before a federal grand jury. His methodical approach and attention to detail had been instrumental in securing convictions against 3 defendants. The commendation ceremony took place in a conference room with a dozen colleagues and supervisors in attendance. The commendation ceremony took place in a conference room with a dozen colleagues and supervisors in attendance. Marcus stood at attention as his division chief read the citation, describing his work on the financial fraud case that had spanned 6 months and involved coordinating with law enforcement agencies across 4 states. The investigation had resulted in the recovery of $2.7 million in stolen pension funds and the conviction of 3 defendants who had been exploiting elderly investors through fake investment schemes. As Marcus accepted the framed certificate, he thought about the contrast between this recognition and the family dynamics he'd left behind. Here, achievements were measured by concrete results and professional competence. Documentation mattered, evidence carried weight, and success was defined by the ability to protect vulnerable people from exploitation. The skills he'd developed tracking down his stolen Bronze Star had evolved into a career built on methodical investigation and unwavering attention to detail. Ceremony, Marcus returned to his desk and opened the case file for his next assignment. A whistleblower complaint had come in through official channels, alleging that a defense contractor was billing the military for equipment that was never delivered. The complainant was a quality control inspector who had noticed discrepancies between shipping manifests and actual inventory at a warehouse facility in Nevada. Initial estimates suggested the fraud could amount to tens of millions of dollars over several years. Marcus spread the documents across his desk and began building his investigation timeline. Purchase orders, delivery confirmations, warehouse inspection reports, and financial records that would need to be cross-referenced against actual inventory counts. The process was similar to what he'd done when tracking Ryan's theft of his metal, but scaled up to involve corporate entities, government contracts, and sophisticated financial instruments. The lead investigator on the case was Special Agent Patricia Santos, a 15-year veteran of federal law enforcement who specialized in defense contractor fraud. Santos had requested Marcus for her team based on his performance in the pension fraud investigation and his military background, which would help him understand the technical specifications of the equipment allegedly being stolen. "This case is going to require someone who understands military procurement processes," Santos explained during their first team meeting. "The contractor has been billing for specialized communications equipment, body armor, and vehicle parts. If they're falsifying delivery records, we need someone who can distinguish between legitimate equipment and paperwork fabrications." Marcus studied the preliminary evidence Santos had assembled. The defense contractor, Advanced Military Solutions, held contracts worth over $300 million annually. They supplied equipment to bases across the southwestern United States and had maintained their contracts for nearly a decade without significant oversight issues. If the whistleblower's allegations were accurate, AMS had been systematically stealing from the military while maintaining a reputation for reliable service. The investigation began with a review of shipping and receiving records at Nellis Air Force Base, where the whistleblower worked as a quality control inspector. Marcus spent 3 days on the base, interviewing personnel and examining warehouse facilities where deliveries from AMS were processed and stored. What he found confirmed the whistleblower's concerns about discrepancies between paperwork and actual inventory. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, the base's supply chain manager, walked Marcus through the receiving process for contractor deliveries. Each shipment was supposed to be inspected upon arrival, with quantities and specifications verified against the purchase order before acceptance.
However, Rodriguez explained that time pressures and staffing shortages often resulted in cursory inspections that focused more on paperwork compliance than physical verification. "We're processing dozens of deliveries every week," Rodriguez said, showing Marcus computer terminals where receiving clerks logged incoming shipments. "The assumption is that contractors are delivering what they're billing for, especially established companies like AMS. Most of our attention goes to new vendors or unusual orders that might indicate problems." Marcus asked to see the receiving records for AMS deliveries over the past 6 months. The documentation showed consistent deliveries of high-value items, encrypted communication devices worth $50,000 each, advanced body armor systems priced at $3,000 per unit, and specialized vehicle components that cost tens of thousands of dollars. All deliveries had been properly logged and accepted without discrepancies noted. But when Marcus cross-referenced the receiving records against actual inventory in the base's secure storage facilities, he found significant gaps. Communication devices
Had been delivered according to paperwork were missing from inventory systems. Body armor that should have been distributed to units was nowhere to be found in supply records. Vehicle components that had been accepted and logged were not available when maintenance crews requested them for repairs. "Either we have a massive theft problem on the base," Marcus told Santos during their evening briefing call, "or we're accepting deliveries that don't actually contain what the paperwork claims." Santos had been conducting similar reviews at 2 other military installations that received regular deliveries from AMS. Her findings matched Marcus's discoveries: consistent patterns of missing inventory that corresponded to high-value items supposedly delivered by the contractor. The scope of the potential fraud was becoming clear, and it was larger than anyone had initially suspected. "We need to see their warehouse operation," Santos decided. "If AMS is billing for equipment they're not actually delivering, there should be evidence of that at their distribution facility. Either they're stockpiling the equipment they're supposed to be shipping, or they're creating fake documentation for deliveries that never happened." The AMS distribution center occupied a sprawling facility outside Las Vegas, with multiple warehouse buildings and a fleet of delivery trucks that serviced military installations throughout the region. Marcus and Santos arrived at the facility under the cover of a routine audit, presenting credentials that identified them as contract compliance investigators, conducting random reviews of defense contractor operations. The facility manager, Robert Kellerman, greeted them with the nervous efficiency of someone who dealt with government oversight on a regular basis. Kellerman provided them with visitor badges and safety equipment, then began a guided tour of the warehouse complex. He spoke with practiced familiarity about inventory management systems, quality control processes, and shipping procedures designed to ensure accurate deliveries to military customers. Marcus observed the operation with the analytical mindset he'd developed through months of federal investigations. The warehouse appeared to function exactly as Kellerman described: workers moving equipment from storage areas to shipping docks, scanning barcodes to track inventory movement, loading trucks with carefully organized deliveries. Everything looked legitimate and efficient. But Marcus noticed details that didn't align with the volume of missing inventory they'd discovered at military bases. The warehouse contained substantial quantities of the high-value equipment that was supposedly being delivered regularly to installations like Nellis. Communication devices, body armor, vehicle components, all sitting in storage areas when they should have been shipped to customers who had already paid for them. During the tour, Marcus asked Kellerman about inventory turnover rates and delivery schedules. Kellerman explained that AMS maintained large inventories to ensure rapid fulfillment of military orders, especially for equipment that might be needed urgently for deployment or training operations. The company prided itself on same-day shipping for critical items and maintained buffer stocks to prevent delays. "How often do you conduct physical inventory counts?" Santos asked. "Monthly for high-value items, quarterly for standard inventory," Kellerman replied. "We also use perpetual inventory systems that track every item from receipt to shipment. Our accuracy rates exceed industry standards." Marcus and Santos spent the afternoon reviewing AMS inventory records and comparing them against shipping documentation for deliveries to military installations. What they found was a sophisticated scheme that exploited weaknesses in military receiving processes and created the appearance of legitimate deliveries while retaining valuable equipment for resale or duplicate billing.
AMS had been creating fake shipping documents that showed deliveries of expensive equipment to military bases, but the actual shipments
contained only lower value items or empty containers. The company's drivers would present the fake paperwork to receiving clerks who were too busy or understaffed to conduct thorough inspections. The deliveries would be accepted and logged as complete, but the valuable equipment would remain in AMS warehouses for subsequent sale or double billing to other customers. The scheme had been operating for at least 3 years and had generated millions of dollars in fraudulent revenue. AMS was essentially selling the same equipment multiple times, once to the military customer who received fake documentation, again to commercial buyers who purchased the equipment through secondary markets, and potentially a third time if they could bill another government contract for the same items. Santos contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office that evening to brief prosecutors on their findings and request authorization for a more comprehensive investigation. The evidence they'd gathered at the AMS facility, combined with the inventory discrepancies at military installations, provided probable cause for search warrants and potential criminal charges against company executives. This is going to be a major case, Santos told Marcus, as they prepared to leave Las Vegas. Defense contractor fraud at this scale involves conspiracy charges, potential money laundering, and theft from the federal government. AMS executives are looking at serious prison time if we can prove they were aware of the scheme. Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of watching a methodical investigation yield concrete results. The same skills he'd used to track Ryan's theft of his Bronze Star had evolved into the ability to uncover complex financial crimes that threatened national security. Each case built on the previous one, teaching him new techniques for following evidence trails and building unshakable prosecutions. 3 weeks later, federal agents executed search warrants at AMS facilities in Nevada, Arizona, and California. The coordinated operation involved over 50 agents and resulted in the seizure of corporate records, computer systems, and millions of dollars worth of equipment that had been fraudulently retained instead of delivered to military customers. 7 company executives were arrested on charges that included conspiracy to defraud the government, mail fraud, and theft of federal property. Marcus participated in the search of the Las Vegas facility, working with a team of agents to catalog evidence and secure financial records that would support the prosecution's case. The warehouse that had appeared so organized during their initial visit revealed a different character when examined with search warrants and forensic accountants. Hidden storage areas contained equipment that should have been delivered months earlier, and computer systems held duplicate billing records that documented the same items being sold to multiple customers. The company's chief executive officer, Thomas McKenna, was arrested at his home in Scottsdale while attempting to delete files from his laptop computer. McKenna had founded AMS 12 years earlier and had built it into one of the largest defense contractors in the southwestern United States. His arrest made national news and prompted congressional hearings about oversight of military procurement contracts. During McKenna's initial court appearance, prosecutors presented evidence that he had personally authorized the fraudulent billing scheme and had used proceeds from the fraud to purchase luxury real estate, expensive vehicles, and a private aircraft. The indictment alleged that McKenna and his co-conspirators had stolen over $47 million from the Department of Defense through their fake delivery scheme. Marcus testified before the grand jury that issued the indictments, describing his investigation of inventory discrepancies at military installations and his discoveries during the initial visit to the AMS facility. His testimony helped establish the timeline of the fraud and provided technical expertise about military equipment specifications prosecutors needed to prove their case. The grand jury proceedings took place in a secure federal courthouse where Marcus had to navigate metal detectors, credential checks, and escort procedures that reminded him of high-security military facilities. The formality of the process reinforced the seriousness of the charges and the importance of building cases that could withstand scrutiny from defense attorneys and appellate courts. After completing his grand jury testimony, Marcus returned to his office to find a message from Colonel Hayes at the Pentagon. The Department of Defense wanted to interview him about his role in exposing the AMS fraud and his recommendations for improving oversight of defense contractor operations. The interview would take place at the Pentagon and would inform policy changes designed to prevent similar frauds in the future. Marcus flew to Washington the following week and spent 2 hours in a conference room with senior Pentagon officials who specialized in contract oversight and fraud prevention. They asked detailed questions about his investigation methods, the weaknesses in military receiving processes that had enabled the fraud, and technological solutions that might improve detection of contractor misconduct. Your background gives you a unique perspective on this problem, Colonel Hayes explained. You understand both the military side of procurement and the investigative techniques needed to uncover sophisticated fraud schemes. We'd like you to consider a permanent assignment to our Contractor Oversight Division. The Pentagon position would involve traveling to military installations worldwide to conduct audits of contractor operations and train personnel in fraud detection techniques. It would be a significant career advancement and would allow Marcus to apply his skills on a global scale, protecting military resources from exploitation by unscrupulous vendors. Marcus asked for time to consider the offer and returned home to Las Vegas to complete his work on the AMS prosecution. The criminal trial was scheduled for the following year, and he would be a key witness in the government's case against McKenna and his co-conspirators. The preparation would require months of additional investigation and collaboration with prosecutors who were building one of the largest defense contractor fraud cases in recent history. While Marcus was traveling to Washington and testifying before grand juries, Ryan had been quietly building a new life that bore no resemblance to his previous existence as an unemployed video game enthusiast living in his parents' basement. The warehouse job had evolved into a supervisor position, and Ryan had enrolled in community college classes to study logistics and supply chain management. His probation officer had become an advocate rather than a watchdog, noting Ryan's consistent employment and educational progress in reports to the federal court. Marcus learned about Ryan's progress through brief conversations with their parents, who had learned to celebrate actual achievements rather than minimal effort. Ryan's transformation seemed genuine this time, built on work experience and education rather than empty promises and family enablement. The federal conviction had forced him to confront the consequences of his choices and develop the kind of character that could withstand scrutiny. During one of their monthly phone calls, Helen mentioned that Ryan had been promoted to shift supervisor at the warehouse, and it was being considered for additional management training. He'd also made the dean's list during his first semester back in college, achieving a grade point average that exceeded anything he had accomplished during his previous academic attempts. "He's different now," Helen said. "More focused, more responsible. I think the legal troubles were actually good for him in the long run." Marcus found himself agreeing with his mother's assessment. Ryan's theft of the Bronze Star had set in motion a series of events that had ultimately benefited both brothers. Marcus had discovered his aptitude for federal investigation work and had built a career that utilized his military skills in meaningful ways. Ryan had been forced to develop genuine competence and accountability that would serve him throughout his adult life. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his brother's crime had become the catalyst for positive changes that might never have occurred otherwise. Ryan's attempt to steal valor had resulted in Marcus receiving additional recognition from the Pentagon and launching a federal career that was more fulfilling than anything he'd previously considered. The theft had revealed character in both brothers, Ryan's willingness to exploit family relationships for personal gain, and Marcus's commitment to justice, even when it required turning in his own brother. 6 months after the AMS arrests, Marcus accepted the Pentagon position and prepared to move to Washington. The federal trial had concluded with guilty verdicts for all defendants, and McKenna had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The investigation had recovered over $30 million in stolen equipment and had resulted in policy changes that would make similar frauds more difficult to execute. Marcus's final day in Las Vegas coincided with Ryan's graduation from community college with an associate degree in logistics management. The symmetry felt appropriate. One brother ending a chapter built on investigating fraud and protecting military resources, the other beginning a career based on legitimate expertise in supply chain operations. The graduation ceremony took place in the college's gymnasium, with several hundred students receiving diplomas in various fields of study. Marcus sat with his parents in the bleachers, watching Ryan walk across the stage to accept his degree. The young man in cap and gown bore little resemblance to the unemployed gamer who had stolen a Bronze Star 2 years earlier. After the ceremony, the family gathered at a restaurant to celebrate Ryan's achievement. The dinner was modest and genuine, without the false enthusiasm that had once characterized their interactions. Ryan spoke about his plans to continue his education while working full-time, eventually pursuing a bachelor's degree in business administration with a focus on operations management. I got accepted to the state university's online program, Ryan announced. I can complete most of the coursework while working, and they gave me credit for my work experience at the warehouse. If everything goes according to plan, I should have my bachelor's degree in about 3 years. David nodded approvingly. That's smart planning, building on what you've already accomplished rather than starting over. Marcus raised his water glass. 2 legitimate achievements earned through honest work. The toast was pointed, but not cruel, acknowledging both Ryan's progress and the contrast with his previous choices. Ryan accepted it with a smile that showed he understood the reference and wasn't offended by the reminder of his past mistakes. To brothers who hold each other accountable, Ryan replied, raising his own glass. After dinner, Marcus and Ryan walked to the parking lot together, extending their time before Marcus's departure for Washington the following week. They'd maintained a cordial but distant relationship since the federal case concluded, communicating mainly through family gatherings and brief text messages about practical matters. I wanted to thank you again, Ryan said as they reached their cars, for everything that happened with the medal. I know it wasn't easy to turn me in, but it was the right thing to do. It wasn't about turning you in. It was about protecting something that mattered and making sure you faced consequences for your choices. I understand that now. And I wanted you to know that those consequences changed my life for the better. The legal trouble forced me to grow up in ways that nothing else had accomplished. Marcus studied his brother's face in the parking lot lighting. Ryan looked older, more serious, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from earning respect rather than claiming it or stealing it.
Then demanding it. The change seemed authentic, built on genuine accomplishments, rather than family enablement or temporary enthusiasm. What are your plans after you finish the bachelor's degree? Marcus asked. I'm thinking about federal employment, maybe customs, maybe military logistics, something where my background and education would be valuable. I know having a criminal record will limit my options, but I want to find work that contributes something meaningful. The answer surprised Marcus. Ryan's interest in federal employment suggested he'd been thinking seriously about rebuilding his reputation and finding ways to serve causes larger than himself. It was exactly the kind of long-term planning and character development that Marcus had hoped the legal consequences would inspire. Federal employment is possible with a criminal record, depending on the nature of the conviction and how much time has passed, Marcus said. Your case was about theft and poor judgment, not violence or ongoing criminal behavior. If you can demonstrate genuine rehabilitation and competence, there are agencies that would consider you. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. That's what my probation officer said. She thinks my educational progress and work history show genuine change, and she's willing to provide recommendations when I'm ready to apply for positions. Marcus felt something approaching pride in his brother's development. Ryan had taken the worst moment of his life and used it as the foundation for building something better. The federal conviction would always be part of his record, but it was becoming evidence of his ability to learn from mistakes rather than a permanent barrier to success. 3 days later, Marcus loaded his belongings into a moving truck and drove east toward Washington. The Pentagon position would allow him to apply his investigative skills on a global scale, auditing defense contractors and training military personnel in fraud detection techniques. It was work that aligned with his values and utilized the expertise he'd developed through cases like the AMS investigation. As Marcus drove through the Nevada desert toward his new career, he reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had brought him from a basement apartment in Las Vegas to a senior position at the Pentagon. The journey had begun with a stolen Bronze Star and a brother who didn't understand the meaning of sacrifice. It was ending with a career built on protecting military resources and a family that had learned to distinguish between support and enablement. The Bronze Star medals sat in their shadow box on the passenger seat, secured for the cross-country drive. Both decorations told important stories about character and choices, about the difference between earning recognition and seeking it through shortcuts. Marcus had learned that justice wasn't always dramatic or immediate, but it was achievable through methodical documentation and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. 6 months after arriving in Washington, Marcus received a promotion to senior investigator and was assigned to lead a new task force focused on international defense contractor fraud. The position involved coordinating investigations with allied military forces and training investigators from partner nations in techniques for detecting sophisticated procurement frauds. Marcus's first international assignment took him
Germany, where he worked with NATO allies to investigate allegations of overcharging and fake deliveries by contractors supplying equipment to multinational military operations. The investigation required him to navigate different legal systems and cultural approaches to law enforcement, expanding his skills beyond domestic federal crimes. The German investigation revealed patterns similar to what he'd discovered in the AMS case. Contractors exploiting weaknesses in oversight processes to retain valuable equipment while billing for completed deliveries. The scale was even larger than the Las Vegas case, involving multiple countries and hundreds of millions of dollars in potential fraud. Working with German, British, and French investigators, Marcus helped build cases against 3 international defense contractors who had been systematically defrauding NATO procurement programs. The investigation resulted in arrests in 4 countries and the recovery of equipment worth over $200 million. The success of the NATO investigation led to additional assignments in Asia and the Middle East, where Marcus worked with allied forces to improve their fraud detection capabilities and investigate local contractors who were exploiting American military operations. Each case taught him new techniques and expanded his understanding of how criminal organizations adapted their methods to different regulatory environments. During a 3-month assignment in South Korea, Marcus received an email from Ryan with updates on his continued education and career development. Ryan had completed his bachelor's degree with a 3.8 grade point average and had been accepted into a master's program in supply chain management. He'd also been promoted to warehouse operations manager and was supervising a team of 15 employees. "I wanted you to know that I've been selected for a federal internship program," Ryan wrote. "It's with the Department of Veterans Affairs, working on logistics and procurement oversight. The position is specifically for people with criminal backgrounds who have demonstrated rehabilitation. I think your case against AMS and other defense contractors influenced the program's development." Marcus read the email while sitting in his hotel room in Seoul, looking out at a city where American military personnel were protected by equipment and supplies that he helped ensure were delivered honestly and completely. Ryan's internship with the VA felt like a fitting continuation of the story that had begun with a stolen Bronze Star and had evolved into a family legacy of accountability and service. The internship program Ryan had entered was indeed influenced by Marcus's work in defense contractor investigations. Congressional hearings following the AMS case had revealed that many procurement frauds were committed by people who understood military systems but had chosen to exploit them for personal gain. The VA program was designed to channel that understanding in positive directions, offering second chances to people who had demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. Marcus replied to Ryan's email with congratulations and practical advice about federal employment. He explained the importance of maintaining high-performance standards, building relationships with supervisors and colleagues, and continuing to document progress through formal evaluations and training records. Federal careers were built on consistent competence and integrity, qualities that Ryan had been developing through years of genuine effort. "Your criminal record will always be part of your background investigation," Marcus wrote, "but it's becoming evidence of your ability to learn from mistakes and build something better. Federal agencies value that kind of character development, especially in positions where integrity and accountability are essential." 2 weeks later, Marcus received a phone call from Colonel Hayes at the Pentagon. The success of his international investigations had attracted attention from senior Defense Department leadership, and they
Discuss expanding his role to include policy development for contractor oversight programs. "We're creating a new position for someone who understands both the investigative and policy aspects of defense contractor fraud," Colonel Hayes explained. "It would involve developing training programs, writing oversight procedures, and working with Congress on legislation to strengthen contractor accountability. Your background makes you uniquely qualified for this kind of work." The policy position would represent another significant career advancement and would allow Marcus to influence systemic changes that could prevent future frauds rather than just investigating them after they occurred. It was work that would utilize everything he'd learned from investigating individual cases and apply those lessons to protecting military resources on a global scale. Marcus accepted the position and returned to Washington to begin developing comprehensive reforms to defense contractor oversight. The work involved analyzing thousands of procurement contracts, identifying common vulnerabilities that criminals exploited, and designing detection systems that could identify suspicious patterns before they resulted in significant losses. The policy development process required Marcus to testify before congressional committees and brief senior Pentagon officials on his recommendations for strengthening contractor accountability. His presentations drew on specific case studies from investigations he'd conducted, providing concrete examples of how sophisticated frauds operated and what measures could prevent them. During one congressional hearing, Marcus was asked about the personal motivation that drove his commitment to investigating contractor fraud. He explained that his work had begun with a family crisis that taught him the importance of documentation, accountability, and the difference between enabling bad behavior and addressing it through proper channels. Military decorations represent sacred trusts between service members and their country, Marcus told the committee. When those decorations are stolen or their meaning is diminished, it affects every person who has served with honor. My work in contractor fraud investigations is an extension of that same principle, protecting the integrity of military institutions from people who would exploit them for personal gain. The hearing concluded with bipartisan support for Marcus's recommendations, including increased funding for contractor oversight programs and stronger penalties for procurement fraud. The legislation that emerged from the hearings became known as the Military Procurement Integrity Act and established new standards for contractor accountability that were adopted by allied nations as well as the United States. 1 year after the legislation was signed into law, Marcus received a letter from Ryan describing his permanent employment with the Department of Veterans Affairs and his assignment to a procurement oversight division that had been created using guidelines Marcus had developed. Ryan's work involved auditing VA contractors to ensure they were delivering medical equipment and supplies as promised, protecting veterans from the kind of exploitation that had once characterized defense contractor operations. I'm using techniques you developed to investigate contractors who might be cheating veterans. It feels like the right kind of work for someone with my background, using knowledge gained from mistakes to protect people who deserve better. I think you'd be proud of what I'm building here. Marcus was indeed proud of Ryan's development and the career he'd built through legitimate effort and genuine competence. The transformation from unemployed gamer to federal investigator represented exactly the kind of character development that consequences were designed to inspire. Ryan had learned that stealing other people's achievements was unnecessary when he was capable of earning his own recognition through honest work. The story that had begun with a family crisis that had taught
Stolen Bronze Star had evolved into a family legacy of federal service and commitment to protecting institutional integrity. Marcus had learned that justice wasn't always immediate or dramatic, but it was achievable through methodical documentation and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Ryan had learned that second chances were possible for people willing to earn them through sustained effort and genuine accountability. Both brothers had found careers that utilized their experiences and skills in service of causes larger than themselves. Marcus's work protecting military resources from fraud and Ryan's work protecting veterans from exploitation represented different applications of the same principle, using knowledge and expertise to defend people and institutions that deserved protection from those who would abuse them. The Bronze Star medals still sat in their shadow box on Marcus's desk at the Pentagon, visible reminders of the journey that had brought him from a basement apartment in Las Vegas to a senior policy position in the nation's capital. Both decorations told important stories about character and choices, about the difference between earning recognition and seeking it through shortcuts. Marcus had learned that true valor wasn't just about courage in combat, but about integrity in daily choices and commitment to principles that transcended personal convenience. The medals represented not just past service, but ongoing responsibility to protect the values and institutions that made such service meaningful. As Marcus prepared for his next international assignment, this time to Australia to help develop contractor oversight programs for Pacific allies, he reflected on the unexpected path that had led him to this work. A brother's theft had become the catalyst for a career dedicated to preventing larger thefts from military institutions. A family crisis had evolved into expertise that protected resources intended for national defense. The lesson wasn't that crime led to positive outcomes, but that consequences could inspire genuine change when people were willing to accept responsibility and build something better from their mistakes.
Ryan's transformation proved that rehabilitation was possible for people who committed to sustained effort and authentic character development. Marcus's career proved that skills developed through adversity could be channeled into service that benefited others facing similar challenges. The story continued to evolve as both brothers applied their experiences to work that protected vulnerable institutions and people from exploitation. It was no longer about stolen valor or family dysfunction, but about using knowledge gained through difficult experiences to serve causes worthy of genuine sacrifice and commitment. The secure conference room in the Pentagon's E-Ring buzzed with quiet intensity as Marcus presented his final briefing to the Defense Secretary's Advisory Board. 3 years of international investigations had culminated in this moment, where his recommendations would either reshape global military procurement or fade into bureaucratic obscurity. The presentation screens displayed charts showing a 43% reduction in contractor fraud across NATO allies, evidence that his oversight protocols were delivering measurable results. Defense Secretary Walsh listened from the head of the mahogany table, occasionally asking pointed questions about implementation costs and timeline feasibility. Around her sat generals, admirals, and senior civilian officials whose decisions would affect military operations worldwide. Marcus had briefed similar groups dozens of times, but this meeting would determine whether his work expanded globally or remained limited to existing pilot programs. The financial impact is clear, Secretary Walsh said, reviewing the summary statistics, but I'm more interested in operational readiness. Are our forces better equipped because of these investigations? Marcus advanced to his next slide, showing deployment statistics from units that had benefited from
Recovered equipment and improved contractor oversight. Units equipped through reformed procurement processes report 96% equipment availability, compared to 78% for units still using legacy oversight methods. The difference isn't just financial. It's about soldiers having the gear they need when they need it. The room fell silent as officials absorbed the implications. Equipment availability directly correlated with mission success and casualty rates. Marcus's work wasn't just saving money, it was saving lives by ensuring that fraudulent contractors couldn't leave soldiers under-equipped in combat zones. Admiral Richardson, the Joint Chiefs representative, leaned forward. What's the timeline for global implementation? 18 months for full deployment across all Allied procurement systems, Marcus replied. We've already trained investigative teams in 12 countries, and the software is ready for immediate installation. Secretary Walsh nodded slowly. Approved. Full implementation with congressional briefings scheduled for next month. This program becomes the new standard for international military procurement oversight. Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of watching methodical work produce systemic change. The same investigative skills he'd developed tracking his brother's theft had evolved into protocols that would protect military resources worldwide. Justice scaled from individual accountability to institutional transformation, but the principles remained constant: documentation, persistence, and unwavering commitment to truth over convenience. After the meeting, Marcus returned to his office to find an email from Ryan with photographs attached. His brother stood in military surplus gear beside a warehouse filled with medical equipment, wearing the confident expression of someone who had found meaningful work. The email's subject line read, 6-month review results. My supervisor says I've identified more procurement irregularities than any other investigator in the department, Ryan wrote. 3 contractors have been suspended, and we've recovered almost $2 million in equipment that was supposed to be delivered to VA hospitals. The techniques you developed are working perfectly in the civilian sector. Marcus opened the performance evaluation, scanning through ratings that uniformly described Ryan as exceptional. Comments from supervisors praised his attention to detail, analytical thinking, and commitment to protecting veteran resources from exploitation. The evaluation recommended Ryan for promotion to senior investigator, an assignment to more complex cases involving international medical supply contractors. The transformation was complete. Ryan had evolved from someone who stole valor to someone who protected it, using skills developed through genuine effort rather than family connections or unearned advantages. His federal career was built on competence and integrity,
qualities that would withstand any scrutiny from background investigators or congressional oversight committees. Marcus replied to Ryan's email with congratulations and an invitation. I'm being assigned to develop contractor oversight programs in the Pacific region.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.